Welcome to TV, Tennessee Valley Church. This week, we are at North Alabama's most famous and recognizable location, the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. In a few minutes, you'll hear from Dr. Kimberly Robinson, the CEO. We Americans seem rather afraid. There is in our nation an underlying uneasiness, a sense of foreboding, angst and apprehension, dread and doubt, nervousness, restlessness, uneasiness. Of course, there are personal fears, fear of bad news from our doctor, fear of bad news from our financial advisor, fear of a relationship ending, and so on. But let's talk today about common, national, societal fears. Things like fear that future generations will not have it as good as we have it, fear of inflation and recession, fear that our best American values are in jeopardy, fear from some that our country is moving too far left, and fear from some that our country is moving too far right, fear of war in the Middle East, fear of change. Inc.com did a story about our top 10 fears as a nation. The number one fear? Fear of change. Things are changing quickly and it can be frightening. Think about it. NASA went to the moon using slide rulers and computers less powerful than your phone. Technology is changing so rapidly, it's unsettling. For old folks like me, it can be frightening. But the changes are not only in technology. There are lots of cultural, societal changes that make us anxious. And our stress is not only due to change. There's a lot of really bad news. There's bad news from the Middle East, bad news from Ukraine. Last week, I saw an interview with Annie Jacobsen about her recent book, Nuclear War. Civilization, as we know it, she wrote, could end in less than 2 hours. I haven't thought about that since I was a kid. That's bad news. Bad news. COVID is going around again. Bad news. The unemployment numbers just ticked up a bit. Lots of us, of all ages, are afraid. We're afraid of bad news. There are obviously some things about which we should be concerned. Jesus, after all, sat on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem one day and was so concerned about the city he loved that he wept over the city. There are some things that I believe should concern us. Fewer and fewer Americans, for example, are even identifying as Christian. That certainly concerns me. The nuclear family, as we have understood it historically and biblically, seems to be in real jeopardy. That concerns me for our society. There are people who, because of the color of their skin or the accent of their tongues, are treated differently, often badly, and that concerns me. There are legitimate things that should cause us to weep over our world. But being afraid is not helpful. When we're afraid, we do bad stuff. When we're on edge and we're fearful, we get angry more quickly. We say mean things to each other that we would not otherwise say. And we fear things that are not true threats. Hear me. We fear things that are not truly threats. There's an interesting story from the early days of Huntsville. It's found in Tom Carney's book about Huntsville's history, The Way It Was. The year was 1813. John Hunt had settled here only 8 years earlier. But the settlement that would become Huntsville was growing rapidly as frontier people poured in and established homes here. 1,500 people already called this home. Native Americans, the Creek Indians in particular, were not crazy about sharing their land with all these new folks. One night, the cry rang out in the settlement, "The Indians are coming, they're killing everyone." Stories of attacks by the Creek were legendary and struck fear deep in the hearts of our forefathers and foremothers. Upon word that the Creek were coming, farmers and merchants and their families fled to their homes to escape the attack. General Andrew Jackson was up in Tennessee. Word reached him of the impending attack on this town, and he, along with hundreds of soldiers, headed this way. What we now know as Huntsville soon had emptied. The citizens had fled. 5 lone, brave men remained, barricaded in the new courthouse. The 5 brave men watched cautiously through the windows of the crude courthouse. Their leader, Captain Wyatt, in an attempt to calm the nerves of his fellow fighters, opened a jug of whiskey, and then another. And it was a long night, so they opened another. Soon their nerves were well calmed, if you get my drift. Then, in the early hours of the morning, still dark, one of them spotted a shadow in the courthouse yard. The men inside began to shoot. They fired their rifles, paused to reload, and fired again. Shots rang out throughout the night until morning, and at sunrise the cavalry arrived in the person of none other than Andrew Jackson and an army of 4,000 soldiers. They had hurried from Tennessee to defend the settlement. The hero of the frontier and their fighting men fanned out across the young town. But there were no Native Americans. The nearest Creek Indians were 100 miles away. The town was not under attack. Captain Wyatt and his 4 other defenders of Huntsville had been shooting at shadows. Get my point? When we're afraid, when we fear that our values are under attack, we shoot at shadows. We lash out at things that appear to be hostile to our beliefs that are not always a threat. Our protests are often unfounded. And I'm talking specifically to my fellow Christians. For example, when I was a teenager, Christians protested that rock music played backwards on the turntables had satanic messages. It was a really big deal. Christians protested loudly. But I don't think there were satanic messages on those records. The power of suggestion had people hearing things that weren't there. We Christians were shooting at shadows. Some of you might remember the outrage of some Christians over the Christmas coffee cups at Starbucks in 2015. Instead of giving their typical cups with snowflakes and reindeer, Starbucks had plain red cups. Well, a number of Christians were outraged at what they labeled a war on Christmas. Now, personally, I wish everybody said Merry Christmas and celebrated Jesus. But plain red holiday cups were not exactly an assault on Christianity or a threat to my religious freedom. See, when we're on edge, afraid, we shoot at shadows. We perceive threats that are not there, and we lose credibility, and we do it fairly often. Now, when there is clear cause for protest and outrage, sign me up. But let's be calm, not afraid. And when we speak, let's speak intelligently. As someone said recently, it's easier to repost than it is to research. Let's not shoot at shadows. What if followers of Jesus were to be known for our non-anxious presence in a tumultuous time? Having a non-anxious presence means maintaining calm, composure, and stability in the face of stress, uncertainty, and conflict. And the Bible has a lot of examples of non-anxious presences in tumultuous times. Like Esther, a calm, non-anxious presence before the king, though her people, the Jewish people, were in real jeopardy. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, a calm, non-anxious presence before the king who had built a statue in his own honor and required everyone to bow to it. Daniel, a calm, non-anxious presence in the lion's den. Certainly Jesus, a calm, non-anxious presence in that boat in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus, a calm, non-anxious presence in the political storm and travesty of a trial that resulted in his violent death. I'm not suggesting that Christians stick our heads in the sand. We can't be naive. We should be informed about and engaged in cultural issues. I'm talking about living calmly, being a non-anxious presence, even in tumultuous times. What if you and I maintained a non-anxious presence? What if we were not afraid of bad news? There's a text from the Bible that has meant a lot to me for a long time. It comes from Psalm 112, verses 7 and 8. They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Their hearts are secure. They will have no fear. As the contemporary English version puts it, bad news won't bother them. They have decided to trust the Lord. The good news among all the bad news is that God can be trusted. God can be trusted to do what is best for us so that at the core of who we are, we can know we're going to be okay. God can be trusted to work in all things for the good of those who love Him. My wife Carrie and I went to a Christian bookstore way back in February of 1991. We were preparing to move with 3 little kids to be missionaries in Africa, and we were stocking up on Christian music to listen to in our soon-to-be home in Nigeria. We bought a cassette. Yes, before Spotify and Pandora, we listened to stuff on like cassettes, and we found a song we loved. The words say, God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. When you don't understand, when you can't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. I remember saying to Carrie, one day that song is going to be very important to us, and I was right. Those words, trust His heart, were so helpful to me in those early difficult days in Nigeria. Now, we came to love Nigeria, but those first few months were hard. And I remembered, when you don't understand, when you can't see His plan, when you can't trace His hand, trust His heart. It made a difference. However, and it's a big however, I didn't trust God like Carrie did, because frankly, I didn't know God like Carrie did. I'll tell you that part of the story in a few minutes.
Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. Surely your goodness and loving kindness will follow me all my life. When you are my shepherd, I shall not want. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. And you're a good father, you'll never leave me, you never forsake me, you never forsake me. And you're a good father, you'll never leave me, you never forsake me, you never forsake me. And you're a good father, and you'll never leave me, you never forsake me, you never forsake me. And you're a good father, and you'll never leave me, I shall not want.
Welcome back to the Space and Rocket Center. We're sitting inside the Davidson Center with the CEO of the Space and Rocket Center, Dr. Kimberly Robinson. And thank you so much for letting TV Church here today.
Oh, it's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Dr. Robinson, Travis is talking today about change and how we fear change. You've been here 3.5 years. You were at NASA before. It was a big change for you. How did that come about?
The CEO of this place for a long time, for about 10 years, was retiring. And she came to me and said that she thought that I'd be a good candidate for the job. And of course, I laughed and said, I don't know what you do. So let's start there. And she started talking to me about the position and saying what a wonderful position it was and how much she enjoyed it and why she thought I'd be a good fit. And so at the time, I thought, sure, why not? I'll put my application in, but what are the chances? They had just come off the best year ever here at the Space and Rocket Center. In 2019, it was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11's landing on the moon. And so the U.S. space community had come out in full force to celebrate, and what a wonderful, great year it was. They broke a world record here at the Space and Rocket Center. During the time, the world changed. The pandemic hit, and the Space and Rocket Center was actually closed for months. And even when it reopened, there was no business to speak of. By the time they narrowed it down to the final few, we were in dire straits. And so then it was not only the consideration of changing from a career that I loved at NASA and knew well and had people and friends that I loved. Not only was it a big change to do that, but it was jumping into something that was very unknown. They weren't sure whether or not the center would stay open. And so I may be jumping through a hole, if you would, something that was not sustainable. And so it was a very big choice, and there was a lot of fear of change. And of course, I talked a lot with my husband. I did a lot of praying. I talked with other family and friends and with my mentors to try to get advice on whether this is something I should consider. I thought, this is where God wants me to contribute, to show value, and not stay in a comfortable position and doing what I know how to do, but try something absolutely new. And more so than that, I wanted to be a part of making sure that this place stayed around. It's very special to me and to many of us in the tech community and in Huntsville and around the surrounding area.
And it's one of the best, if not the best, space museums in the world.
Yes,
Now, keeping with change, you all have done a lot of renovation and remodel lately. Tell us about that.
Well, so I mentioned we were in dire straits when I first got here. I really didn't know how dire, and that's probably a good thing. But when I did find out when I got here, we had lost $50 million in revenue and assets, which is not easy to recover from ever. And we had lost 90% of our staff. So a staff of over 1,200 people had been reduced to 91 due to layoffs. It was really touch and go. And there were times when I had my head down on my desk, not knowing where the next bad news was going to come from. You know, it was great because, it brought me to my knees, and, I had those conversations that I'm sure lots of us have that's like, okay, God, I need a miracle. I need a miracle. This is where you show up. This is where you show up and you show out and you show us what can happen. The great news is He did over and over again. And He did it through community leaders. He did it through state, county, city, government. He did it through our donors who were so generous and just joined us on this mission to make sure that not only were we going to stay around, but that we were going to be better than ever. And so that is the mission that we've been on, is not only recovery, but to surpass anything that we've done before. And so I'm very proud to announce that last year was our new best year ever. Wow. So we had the best, the worst, and then quickly following behind not long after, the overall best again.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
and today,
you.
business is bustling. Lots of people in here today.
Yes.
And again, thank you for letting us be here.
Absolutely.
When Carrie and I were newly married, I was not committed to the daily discipline of prayer and Bible study. But I can't tell you how many times I'd walk through our house or apartment and I'd find Carrie alone having her daily quiet time with God, quietly, without drawing any attention to it. Since her high school days, she has spent a long time every morning alone with her Creator. For all those years, with her Bible in her lap and her journal on the couch beside her, she nurtured her relationship with God. Then we moved to Nigeria as missionaries in 1991. And those first few weeks were tough. There was lots of bad news. Bad news, it's dry season. Water is rare. Bad news, the plant is down. Electricity will be rare for several months. Bad news, the language is hard and the isolation is stifling. Bad news, there's political unrest. After a few months, I broke through the wall and we all ended up loving Nigeria. Life and ministry there were very rewarding, but initially being in Nigeria was tough and I didn't do so well. Carrie, on the other hand, was much stronger than I was during those early trying days. She experienced the same bad news, the same stressors that I did, but she was much more at peace. I happened to be reading the Bible one morning when I suddenly understood why Carrie was coping far better than I was. It was because of her daily discipline of meeting with God. I remember the feel of the cement floor of our Nigerian house under my feet and the weight in my heart as I walked across the room and I said to Carrie, "You're stronger than I am because you know God better than I do." After all those years of prayer and Bible study, Carrie had a depth of spirituality that I didn't have, a reserve that I couldn't draw from, a peace I had only preached about. She trusted God for she knew Him well, and she wasn't afraid of bad news. There's lots of bad news, right? But as the hymn writer said, there is a place of quiet rest near to the heart of God. Draw near to His heart. Read His Bible like you would read a letter from a loving parent. Be faithful in prayer. Cast your cares on Him. Get involved in a good church. Trust your Father in heaven. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of bad news.
When peace like a river attended my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, Thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul, it is well with my soul, it is well, it is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. reach the day when my faith shall be sight. The clouds be rolled by as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul. It is well. It is well with my soul.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Tim Boone, Minister of Missions at First Baptist Huntsville. To be a follower of Jesus means that you're on mission. God calls all of us to join our hearts with God's heart for the world. I hope that you'll join us as we seek to be the church in the heart of the city, with a heart for the region and for the world. You can visit the missions page on our website to find different ways to serve right where you are, or you can join us as we travel outside of our city and throughout our world. You can also email me at tim@fbchsv.org. I'd love to hear from you.